There is a debt collector who has never knocked on your door, who has never sent a letter, who has never called your name, and yet you have been paying him every single day of your life. You feel him in the tightness across your chest when the bills arrive. You feel him in the hesitation before you ask for what you are worth. That debt was never yours. It was signed by hands that turned to dust generations before you took your first breath. And somehow, the ink never dried. What if I told you that lack is not a personality trait? It is not bad luck, and it is not the universe punishing you for some forgotten sin. It is a frequency, inherited like eye color, passed down through fear, through silence, through the quiet desperation of people who loved you enough to survive, but never learned how to thrive. Tonight, we are not going to talk about money as paper and metal. We are going to talk about the current beneath it, the energetic alignment that either opens the gate of divine supply or seals it shut for an entire bloodline. The frequency I am about to give you is not mine. It does not belong to any guru, any temple, any tradition that can be bought or franchised. It moves under a name that your spirit will recognize, even if your mind resists it. YESERAYE EFFATA. Say it slowly, in now, under your breath. Feel the strange familiarity of it. The way an old song feels when you hear it after years of forgetting the words. This is sovereign. This is yours to claim. By the end of this journey, the contract you never signed will be unrecognizable to you, not because I am promising you a lottery ticket or a miracle deposit, but because the lens through which you see scarcity will have been quietly, permanently rearranged. And this leads us to the secret hiding inside your own lineage, the one we will unlock together in just a moment. Picture a ledger, ancient and water-stained, kept not in a bank vault but in the marrow of your bones. Every entry was made by someone who came before you, a grandmother who watched her harvest fail, a father who learned that hope was dangerous because hope, once disappointed, cuts deeper than hunger itself. Nobody asked you to inherit this ledger. You simply did. The way you inherited the shape of your hands or the timbre of your laugh, silently, automatically, without ceremony. This is the architecture of ancestral poverty, not a curse whispered by a witch in a folktale, but a frequency of fear that calcified into belief, and belief that calcified into behavior. The harvest of the soul was interrupted somewhere upstream, and the river that should have reached you arrived instead as a trickle, rationed, anxious, grateful for crumbs. You were taught, without a single word being spoken, that wanting more was dangerous, that asking was shameful, that the infinite ocean of provision was reserved for other families, other bloodlines, other people who simply got lucky. I want you to notice something happening in your body right now, because the body always knows before the mind admits it. There may be a tightening in your jaw, a held breath, a flicker of old shame rising like smoke from a fire you didn't light. This is not weakness. This is recognition. The bloodline ledger is being read aloud for the first time in your lifetime, and something in you, ancient, unstoppable, waiting, has been hoping someone would finally open the book. Here is what they never told you in church, in school, in any family dinner where money was spoken of only in hushed, anxious tones. Scarcity is not your destiny. It is your inheritance, and inheritances can be renounced. A contract signed by someone else, in someone else's fear, under someone else's sky, has no binding power over a sovereign spirit who chooses you today to read the fine print and refuse the terms. And this leads us to the moment your ancestors first signed that contract, the moment we are about to walk into together, with eyes wide open. Somewhere in the long corridor of your lineage, there is a single moment, not a century, not a vague era, but one specific night when fear first became law. Maybe it was a famine that emptied a village. Maybe it was a war that swallowed a harvest whole. Maybe it was simpler than that. A parent standing in a doorway, counting coins that wouldn't stretch to morning, making a silent vow that survival would always come before expansion. That vow was never written on paper, yet it became the most binding contract your family ever signed. Contracts like this do not need ink. They need only repetition. The fear that began as a single night of dread became a Tuesday habit, then a Sunday prayer, then a holiday tradition of scarcity dressed up as humility. We don't need much. We should be grateful for what we have. People like us don't get rich. Each phrase sounds modest. Each phrase is, in truth, A renewal clause, signed again and again by people who believed they were being wise when they were actually being bound. You were born into the middle of this contract, not its beginning. That is important, because it means the terms were never yours to negotiate. A child does not choose the energetic alignment of the home she's born into any more than she chooses the language she first speaks. You absorb the frequency of lack the way you absorbed your mother tongue fluently, instinctively, without ever once being asked if you agreed to the grammar of it. But here is the clause they forgot to mention. Contracts written in fear can be dissolved in frequency, not through force, not through clenched jaw willpower, but through a vibrational override so precise it reaches backward through the bloodline ledger and renders the original signature illegible. This is where YESERAYE EFFATA enters, not as a chant, not as a trend, but as a key shaped exactly for this lock. And this leads us to the moment we finally understand what that key actually is. YESERAYE EFFATA is not a phrase you analyze. It is a phrase you feel arriving. The way thunder arrives before the rain, a pressure change in the air of your own awareness. Break it apart for a moment, slowly, the way you'd turn a stone over in your palm. YESERAYE carries the cadence of release, of something ancient being unbound. EFFATA echoes a command older than money itself. Be open. Together, they form a single sovereign instruction, spoken not to the world outside you, but to the locked vault inside you where the bloodline ledger has been kept sealed for generations. This is not magic in the cheap, theatrical sense, no rabbit pulled from a hat, no overnight deposit appearing because you whispered a word 3 times before bed. This is energetic alignment, the quiet recalibration of the frequency your nervous system has been broadcasting since childhood. Lack has a vibration, tight, contracted, defensive. Abundance has a vibration, open, expansive, unafraid. YESERAYE EFFATA functions as the tuning fork that interrupts the old broadcast and lets the new one in. You do not need to understand its etymology to use it. You do not need permission from an institution, a guru, or even from me. The moment you speak it quietly, deliberately, with your eyes closed and your spine straight, something in your field shifts. The way a room shifts when someone finally opens a window that's been sealed shut for years. The stale air leaves first. The light comes in after. I want you to say it now, just once. Just to feel its shape in your mouth. YESERAYE EFFATA. Notice if your shoulders drop. Notice if your breath goes slightly deeper, almost against your will. That is not your imagination, that is the golden rain beginning to find the cracks in a contract that was never yours to keep. And this leads us into the body itself, into the exact place where all of this old fear has been quietly stored, waiting for permission to leave. Your spine remembers things your mind has long forgotten. Long before scarcity became a belief you could argue about at a dinner table, it was a sensation lodged somewhere physical, a held breath in the chest, a clenched fist behind the sternum, a low hum of dread coiled at the base of the throat. The body does not store memory the way a journal does, in neat chronological entries. It stores memory the way sediment settles in a riverbed, layer upon layer, each one pressing down on the one before it until the original shape of the fear is buried so deep you mistake it for personality. Notice your jaw right now. Notice whether it is tight, whether your tongue is pressed hard against the roof of your mouth, the way it gets when you're bracing for bad news that hasn't even arrived yet. This bracing is ancestral. It was useful once it kept someone alive during a winter, a war, a season when vigilance was the only thing standing between a family and ruin. But you are not living in that winter. You are living now, carrying a nervous system tuned to a danger that passed generations ago, still scanning for a wolf that left the forest long before you were born. This is why willpower alone has never been enough to dissolve a poverty contract. You cannot outthink a frequency stored in tissue. You cannot affirm your way past a vault sealed in muscle memory. The body needs to be spoken to directly, in its own language, not logic, but vibration. Not argument, but resonance. This is why YESERAYE EFFATA is spoken aloud, and not merely thought. Sound moves through bone. Sound reaches the archive that language alone cannot unlock. Place a hand on your chest now, if you're able, and simply breathe. Feel the warmth of your own palm against your sternum, the soft rise and fall beneath it. You are not fixing something broken. You are visiting a room that has been locked for a long time, letting it know that the danger it has been guarding against has already passed. And this leads us, finally, into the first guided dissolution, the moment we stop talking about release and actually do it together. Find stillness now, wherever you are. If you can close your eyes safely, do so. If not, simply soften your gaze and let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Take one breath in through the nose, slow, deliberate, and let it out through the mouth like a long exhale of something old finally leaving the room. We are not performing a ritual for an audience. We are doing private, sacred work, the kind that asks for nothing but your honest presence. Picture, if you can, a thread thin, silver gray, slightly frayed at the edges extending from the center of your chest backward into the dark behind you. This thread does not represent your ancestors as people. It represents the specific frequency of fear that traveled down through them to you, the original contract signed in someone else's desperate winter. You are not severing your family. You are not erasing your history. You are simply releasing a vibration that was never meant to outlive the moment it was created in. Now, silently or aloud, speak the sovereign frequency, YESERAYE EFFATA. Say it once, slowly, and picture warm golden light gathering at the place where the thread meets your chest. The light does not burn the thread violently, it dissolves it gently, the way morning sun dissolves frost from a window, patiently, completely, without drama. Say the phrase again, YESERAYE EFFATA. Feel the thread thinning, growing transparent, until it simply is no longer there. Sit for a moment in the quiet that follows. This is not emptiness, this is space. Space where a contract used to sit, now yours to fill with something new. If you feel your resonance shifting even slightly, even a fraction, let me know in the comments below. Declare your readiness, and let that declaration become its own act of sovereignty. And this leads us towards something even more important than release, the question of who, exactly, has been standing behind you this entire time. For most of your life, you may have imagined your ancestors as a long line of tired, frightened faces standing behind you, silently reinforcing the old contract every time you tried to rise above it. I want to offer you a different image, one that is, I believe, far closer to the truth. Those same ancestors who once signed the contract out of fear are not your jailers. They are your counsel, and counsels, unlike jailers, can be petitioned, can be reasoned with, can even become your fiercest allies once they understand release is possible. Think of your grandmother, or whoever in your line carried the heaviest version of this fear. She did not want this for you. No one rationing bread by candlelight ever dreamed that their great-grandchild would still be flinching at the sight of an invoice generations later. She did what she could with the frequency she had access to in her moment of history. She did not have YESERAYE EFFATA. She did not have a guided dissolution. She had only survival, and she gave you that survival as a gift, even if the gift came wrapped in fear. This reframe matters more than it might seem. When you approach your bloodline ledger with resentment, you stay tangled in the very frequency you're trying to release. Resentment is, after all, just another form of contraction, another clenched fist. But when you approach it with compassion, something remarkable happens. The witnesses behind you stop pulling you backward and start, instead, to push you gently forward, relieved that someone in the family finally found the key. Speak this, if you're willing, in your own words or in mine. I release you from the fear you carried. I release myself from the fear I inherited. We are both free now. Feel the shift in the room behind you, in the long corridor of faces stretching back further than memory can reach. They are not haunting you anymore. They are witnessing you, and witnessing, when it is full of love instead of guilt, becomes its own kind of blessing. And this leads us to something hidden beneath all of this fear, buried inheritance far older and far richer than the poverty contract ever was. Here is something almost no one tells you about ancestral lines. Scarcity was never the original frequency. Before the famine, before the war, before whatever single night first taught your family to fear, there was another inheritance, older, quieter, golden at the root. Every bloodline, no matter how buried under generations of contraction, carries a memory of abundance somewhere in its history, because no family begins in lack. Lack is always a response to a specific wound. Beneath the wound, the original frequency remains intact, waiting. Imagine this golden inheritance as a seam of light running beneath a field that has been plowed the same anxious way for 100 years. The farmers above never knew it was there. They worked the surface, exhausted, grateful for whatever modest yield the topsoil would give them, never once suspecting that 2 feet beneath their feet ran a vein of something luminous, untouched, simply waiting for someone to dig deep enough to find it. You are the one who digs deep enough. That is what this entire journey has been preparing you to do. This buried inheritance is not metaphorical wishful thinking, it is the recognition that your family, like every family, once knew how to receive before they learned how to brace. Somewhere in your line, there was a harvest celebrated without guilt, a trade made with confidence, a gift given freely because the giver trusted that more would come. That memory did not disappear. It was simply layered over, the way ash settles over fertile ground after a fire, hiding the soil's true richness beneath a gray, forgettable surface. When you speak YESERAYE EFFATA now, you are not only dissolving the contract of fear, you are also calling this buried seam of gold back up toward the surface, back into reach, back into your own daily life. Say it once more, slowly, YESERAYE EFFATA. Feel it, not as an ending, but as an excavation, a careful, reverent unearthing of something that was always rightfully yours. And this leads us into the second and final dissolution. The moment we seal this new frequency permanently into your body and into your home. Come back now to stillness, the same way you did before, spine soft but upright, hands resting wherever they feel natural, breath slowing on its own without you forcing it. The second dissolution is not about cutting anything further. The thread was already released. This one is about sealing, taking the open space left behind and filling it, deliberately, with the frequency you actually want to live inside for the rest of your life. Picture the golden seam we just uncovered, that buried inheritance of ease and trust, rising now like warm light through soil, through floorboards, through the very chair or floor beneath you. Let it rise until it reaches the space in your chest where the old thread used to sit. There is no resistance to feel here, because resistance was the old frequency, and the old frequency has already left the room. There is only welcome. Speak the sovereign phrase one final time tonight, YESERAYE EFFATA. Let it move through you slower than before, almost like a seal pressed into warm wax. Feel it settle not just in your chest, but outward into your hands. The hands that will sign new agreements, take new risks, receive new gifts without flinching. Feel it settle into your home, into the walls around you, into whatever room you happen to be sitting in right now, as if the entire space just exhaled. This seal is yours to renew any time the old static tries to creep back in, and it may try, quietly, in small moments, an old habit of bracing before opening a bill, an old reflex of guilt before accepting a gift. When that happens, you do not need to panic or believe the work failed. You simply return here, to this frequency, and speak the phrase again. Sovereignty is not a single event. It is a practice you return to, gently, for as long as it takes to become your new default. And this leads us into what life actually looks like now, the other side of the contract. A new ledger does not announce itself with fireworks. It tends to arrive quietly, almost embarrassingly small at first, an unexpected refund, a client who pays without the usual delay, a stranger who insists on covering the bill for no clear reason at all. Your old frequency would have dismissed these as coincidence. Your new frequency recognizes them for what they are, proof that the energetic alignment has shifted, evidence submitted by the universe that the contract really has been dissolved. I want you to notice your own reactions to receiving, starting today. Notice if you flinch when someone offers to help you, if you rush to minimize a compliment, if you feel a strange urge to apologize for asking for what you're worth. These reflexes are the last echoes of the old bloodline ledger, fading static on a frequency that no longer has a transmitter. You do not need to fight them. You only need to notice them, and let the noticing itself be a quiet refusal to sign the contract again. Begin speaking differently about provision, even in small ways. Instead of, "I can't afford that," try, "That's not where my resources are aligned right now," not as a denial of reality, but as a refusal to let scarcity speak with your voice. Instead of "money is hard to come by," try "the harvest is moving toward me, even when I can't yet see the field." Language is not decoration. Language is the daily renewal clause of whichever contract you choose to keep signing. And you now have the power to choose differently. Watch, too, for the people around you who still operate from the old frequency, because they may unconsciously try to pull you back into familiar contraction, not out of malice, but out of habit. The same way a family member might be unsettled when you stop matching their old rhythm. You do not need to convince them, you only need to hold your own frequency steady, the way a tuning fork holds its note in a room full of noise, until eventually, quietly, the room begins to match you instead. And this leads us to where we go from here, beyond this video and to the months ahead. There is a particular kind of silence that follows real release, not the heavy silence of suppression, but the light, spacious silence of a room that has finally been aired out after years of staying shut. Sit inside that silence for a moment before you do anything else. Do not rush to test whether it worked. Do not demand proof from the universe by tomorrow morning. The seam of gold beneath the field does not rise overnight just because you finally found it. It rises the way all true harvests rise, season by season, in its own unhurried time. What I will ask of you now is simple and specific. Return to YESERAYE EFFATA whenever the old contraction tries to resurface, not as a magic password, but as a daily act of sovereignty. Speak it in the shower. Speak it before opening an email you've been dreading. Speak it the moment you catch yourself rationing joy the way your ancestors once rationed bread. Each time you do, you are not repeating a ritual, you are renewing a new ledger, one written by you, in your own hand, under terms you actually chose. If something in you shifted tonight even slightly, even just a loosening in the chest, or a breath that came easier than usual, tell me in the comments below. Declare it. Say where you felt it, what it loosened, what you're ready to receive now that you weren't ready to receive before. Let that declaration be the first new entry in your ledger, the first sentence of a contract written in trust instead of fear. The field is yours now. The seam runs beneath it, closer to the surface than it has been in generations, waiting only for you to keep walking toward it instead of away.